and I'll do a little editing on YouTube later to cut out the.
Look at you, Brooke McBride, editing.
Well, it is a little archaic. New things. Okay. Well, hi, Bear Creek. This is Pastor Brooke, and I've got a wonderful friend with me today, Megan Luther. And Megan was on one of my youth, and when I was in Mitchell, South Dakota, she was part of our youth group. And we went on a couple mission trips, one to Dallas and then one to Chicago, that I'm really interested in to ask Megan and talk to her about how that impacted her in her life, and just a little bit too about what she's feeling about the racial injustice that's going on in the world today. So, hi, Megan.
Hi, Brooke.
Well, tell me a little bit, just for folks, a little bit about yourself and maybe what you're doing now.
Sure. So I grew up in Mitchell, a town of about 14,000 in South Dakota. Grew up in a very, very white community. Our entire high school, which had almost 1,000 students, had one Black student the entire 4 years I went to school. Hopefully our city has gotten more diverse. But I didn't have a lot of interactions as a South Dakotan with any Black people besides that one student. And we'll talk about how I kind of grew with the Dallas and Chicago mission trip. I've also been to Haiti on a mission trip. And then I moved to Atlanta and I worked in downtown Atlanta. Very diverse group of people. And I learned a lot and grew a lot. My husband and I went through the adoption process, and a birth mother chose us and her baby. Our son is biracial, Black and white. So both of my sons are Black and white. And as a mother, I educate myself. And so my journey has been, I'd like to say I've grown a lot, and I'd like to say I've been embarrassed of what I didn't know several years ago. So I'd like to think that, I tend to be a source for white people, especially in our community, trying to educate themselves about white privilege and what we can do to support people of color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Megan, when you think about yourself in say, 9th grader, 8th grader, 9th grader, and I think the first kind of mission trip we took was to Dallas, which was definitely a multiracial experience for us. Do you remember how you felt going down, and kind of what were your initial responses to just meeting with kids of different color and being around a community like that?
Sure. I think I would describe myself as naive, and they don't teach racial discrimination and racial injustices in school, unfortunately. And I think it's getting better, but it's still not where it needs to be. So I didn't even realize, we didn't talk about systemic racism. We helped a couple who happened to be a Black elderly couple with their house. They were more than gracious to us. And I feel like I learned more from the people we interacted with in these mission trips. And, now that I know what I know, these, people of color were very gracious with their time, because we were just young, naive, white, rural kids. And, our first interactions with people of color were with them. And I think that for some of them, it put an unnecessary burden on them to, as we say now, kind of represent their race or educate young idiot white folks on kind of the struggles they go through. And they were very, very gracious and very welcoming, and they didn't have to be.
Mm-hmm. I remember when we went to Chicago, we worked with an African-American church down in South Chicago, kind of a rough area of Chicago. I remember going into, you guys were working in the church, and I had to run some errands, and I was going to pick something up in one of the stores, and I walked into the store and they all looked at me. I mean, it was all African-American, everybody was there, and this store owner looked at me and said, do you think you're in the right place? And I said, well, I think I'm in the right place. And they were very gracious, but they were kind of made a joke about it too, which was kind of fun. But we went, do you remember going to a swimming pool? One of my memories was to go into that. Remember when I thought, first of all, when they said, hey, we're all going to go swim, and then this is a vacation Bible school, so we must have had 50 to 100 kids. And they said, we're going to go, it was hot, and we're going to go take a break at a swimming pool. I was thinking it was going to be this big pool, but do you remember it?
It was someone's backyard. We were in someone's backyard pool, like it was a, above ground out, pool. I do remember very distinctly. So,
yes. And I wish I never did get a picture, but I wish I would have had just be able to hover above and take a picture from the top, because it really was, salt and pepper. We were just all mixed in there. I was so impressed by our group, just how easily you worked with people who were different than we were, but also how much we had in common. You even shared with me, Megan, that you wrote some letters later with kids there.
Yeah, I think we kept in contact for a little bit. The kids were amazing to work with, and kids. But I do remember I took a distinct picture. And we were sitting in the church pews, and one of the kids held my hand, and I took a picture of our hands. My very pale hand and their very dark hand. For some reason, that image just kind of struck with me, and I still have it somewhere. But yeah, it's they, again, very gracious, and we learned more from them than we got more needed for sure.
Yeah. So when you came back after those, you kind of get your eyes opened a little bit to a different world, and you come back to Mitchell, South Dakota. Do you think, did you run into moments where you bumped into racism, or when did that start happening for you, where you started to realize that there was people that, weren't really in favor of mixing things up?
I really ran into it actually when I moved to Atlanta. I was 23, 24, 25, somewhere around there, young 20s, for my first job. And I worked downtown Atlanta, and, I was in the South. There's definitely racism in Mitchell, South Dakota and the North, but I never heard the N-word until I moved to Atlanta. And it really opened my eyes, because there were times, like, I took the subway, and there were times that I was the only white person in, the entire train. And so one of the things that, and I also learned this too when I was when we were in Chicago, is, when you're one of a few of a certain race, you realize, like, I need to be on my best behavior. I'm representing a race. And that hardly ever happens to white people, but it happens to people of color all the time.
Sure does.
And I think that is a eerie feeling, to be like, okay, I'm the only white person here. I better not do anything stupid or, act out or anything. And so it's a I think it's a burden for people of color to have that. And I actually reached out to my classmate, my Black classmate in high school, and I apologized. I said, I did not realize what burden was on your shoulder and what you went through. And he, of course, shared a lot of stories about the racism he experienced, and I had no idea.
Was that Eric?
Yep. Yeah, it was Eric. Yeah, a member of our church. So yeah, a member of our church. So he experienced a lot of different discrimination. And, I didn't realize that at the time when we were there. As I got older and we had conversations.
And now having children who are biracial and Black and white, as you put it, what does that mean for you as you see what's going on, in our country right now? How does that affect you, Megan? What goes through your head?
I fear for my son's lives. No one's going to look at my children and be like, well, they're Black and white. They're going to be like, those are Black boys, or those are Black men. One of my son, who is 3 years old, is big for his age. And, there's a lot of discussion of what point do Black men and Black boys go from cute to, dangerous or threatening to people. There are a lot of conversations that I have with my kids at age appropriate times, mostly with my 6-year-old. My children are not allowed to play with their Nerf guns or their squirt guns in the front yard. If I had white children, that would not be a problem. There are so many examples. Tamar Rice is one, a 12-year-old playing in the park with a gun. That's the reason I know that. There's another, I believe he was 14 years old, went to a high school party, like so many people have done. I've done when I was in high school, and he was leaving a high school party completely unarmed, shot and killed. So things that my sons will have to go through that I never went through. So I'm just trying to educate myself, and I'm trying to protect them, and I'm trying to, I think, educate white people and white parents that I have very different concerns than you do. And that's because of systemic racism that's been, going on for 400 years. And I always use the example of, I can walk into a Target with a backpack. My sons cannot. I can walk into Saks Fifth Avenue as a blonde-haired white woman, in a backpack, and my sons cannot. There's just a lot of things that my sons experience that I will never and have never experienced.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to somebody who is, a white person who's privileged, living, double incomes, that don't have anybody in this race, so to speak? I mean, in the sense of how would you suggest they get involved with this? I mean, what would be some first steps to get, kind of involved with, caring about this issue and making a difference out there?
Sure. I think the first step is educating yourself. And that starts with us. It is our job as white people, because I think sometimes we'll reach out to our friends of color or people be like, what can I do? It is our job. It is not the people of color's burden to educate white people. And so it's our job to educate ourselves. So one of the books I recommend is White Fragility. It's a quick read. It talks about white privilege. And just because we talk about white privilege doesn't mean that that's saying the burdens that you went through as a white person or growing up, or, the barriers you faced didn't exist. It's just educating yourself about, you have a privilege at the color of your skin. So, a good example, my husband grew up very poor, and he had a lot of barriers in his life, but he still had the privilege as a as a white male to, for example, drive without getting pulled over or getting a loan for a house. This is not just a police issue. This is a societal issue where it affects whether Black people can get a loan. I mean, there are studies, there's statistics, there's hard data that shows every sector of our life that they've been discriminated against. And it starts at a young age. It starts with prenatal care. It starts with preschool. It starts with education. And we still have segregated schools, and there's a lot of information out there. So the first thing you can do is just educate yourself. And in that White Fragility book, it's actually written by a white woman. So I think, I think that's helpful for some white people to digest. But she talks about how when we as white people get defensive, this is not helping the conversation. So she talks about white privilege. She talks about getting defensive. But it's a book that really, I think, can educate a lot of people, and she'll give you some action points as well as what we can do. But the first thing is educate yourself. One of the things that you could quickly do right now is stop using the term all lives matter. We see a lot, and there are several examples, just Google it, of why that is offensive. But no one is saying, it would be great. Of course, all lives matter. It would be great if society treated all lives the same, but we do not. And so this is why the Black Lives Matter movement has come to fruition, because it's, they're not treated equally. But there are several articles as to why all lives matter is offensive. So the first thing that they can do is stop using that term.
We have a family in our church that has adopted two children who are of color. And I wanted to ask you, from a church perspective, what are some things you think that our church could do to help that couple or to be with that couple? But that's a hard question, but
No, the biggest thing is to educate yourself and support. We use the term, be an ally, but, words are hurtful. So you have to be careful what you say. And I know people are like, oh, I can't say anything. You just need to educate yourself. So example, saying that I'm colorblind, I don't see race is not a great thing to say, because that's just ignoring the fact that my children, who are children of color, aren't experiencing, it's ignoring the stats and the issues that my children of color are experiencing the same things as a white person. I have a hard time as an adoptive mom, raising children of color, in the fact that, I'm so thankful to both of my children's birth moms, and we've had this conversation, so I'm not speaking online, but, this is part of a systemic problem. Like, it's part of nature for children to be raised by their birth parents. And so I feel guilt because of my white privilege. I was able to adopt children, and, my husband and I, both being white, are not able to meet all of our children's needs. So we look for Black mentors. That's another thing that is really important. So at the church, make sure that, the books include Black characters, or whatever color, these children are, characters of color in books, dolls of color, and that's not just for these kids, but it's for every kid. Another simple thing is Band-Aids. Make sure your church has multi-colored Band-Aids, because it sends a message to a child when, getting better, but every Band-Aid on the shelf is, it's called flesh tone, but the is a peach white tone.
Right.
So things like that.
Sure. So as your kids are going to get older, and your challenges, you've had challenges already. As you work through these challenges, tell me a little bit about how your faith helps you with this. And did your faith have anything to do with your decision to adopt, children?
No, my faith had nothing to do with the decision to adopt my children.
Okay.
I wanted to adopt my children because for the most selfish reason possible, I wanted to be a mom. My husband and I could not have children, and so I adopted for the most selfish reasons possible.
Sure.
Because I wanted to be a mom. So, I think in all this, my faith goes back to loving all, and, and I believe in a loving God, and a very supportive God. And I believe that, as, faith-based people, that, look to the stories that we were told of, what they said about, Jesus, and, being, and the different stories about how they were treated, and other people were treated. And so, I do warn, one of the concerns I do have is, especially when it becomes, faith-related based adoptions, is we have to make sure that we don't play the white savior. And I never intended to adopt children of color. We just wanted to adopt a child, and it happened to be a biracial child. So I'm not saving my children, whatever.
Because that really doesn't help anything, does it? I mean, that complex that we have sometimes as white people to save is not helpful in this situation. I think that's well said. And then as we work on this, Megan, for me, it's about building relationships with people all over the world, but people of color, African Americans, that is equal, that it's a sharing, that it's mutual. And I think that means we have to be vulnerable, right? I mean, we have to bring our vulnerability to the table. It's not easy. I've been trying to help people just if they have some racial thoughts or some privileged thoughts of, we need to talk about it. How do you talk about it in a safe way so that you can be transformed, so that transformation can happen? Because I think those are underneath us. I mean, we have these thoughts sometimes, and we need to work through them and become aware of the privilege. I mean, or like you said, being defensive, right? That doesn't help, but we do get defensive. I mean, I think that's one of the things we need to work through. Why, when we get defensive certain spots, we need to take a good look at where it's coming from.
And I think the first thing is, be honest with yourself. We all have prejudices.
Yes.
Including me. We've all had racial thoughts, including myself. Like we all, every single person. And whether it's subconscious or not, we've all had those. And we have all benefited because of the color of our skin on a racist society. I've had an easier time getting a home loan because of the way our system has worked. So being honest and you're right, you have to be uncomfortable. White people need to start being uncomfortable. And start being uncomfortable, then you kind of am able to learn, and you're, being able to be reflective. And the other thing is listen, okay? When someone of color tells you what you're doing is a microaggression, or racist, you listen. And I know that's not our typical, response. Our response is say, I'm not racist, I have friends, whatever. Listen, just shut up and listen. When someone says they experience something, we need to start believing them. Because this has been going on for 400 years. And this is, these issues have been going on for decades. And white people did not believe Black people until people started recording it and getting it on video. This is nothing new. It just happens, technology has evolved. So, the first thing is to listen. And the second thing is to be uncomfortable. I think when you get into, like you said, a vulnerable spot and being willing to be uncomfortable, that is when we're going to start to learn and to educate ourselves on being better humans.
Yeah, I like that. I don't like being uncomfortable, but it is truthful.
It's hard.
That's kind of the truth, letting that truth of uncomfortability kind of help you through this. So.
And I'll tell you a good example of being uncomfortable is when someone called me out that as a white woman, I should not be raising children. And at first I was appalled, like I'm a good mother, but then I listened, and what this person said, who's an adoption expert, resonated with me, and it made sense to me once I stopped and I listened and I allowed myself to be uncomfortable.
Good for you. Well, I appreciate our conversation here, Megan. And I as you go forward, another thing, everybody, is Megan is an investigative reporter. So key work in our world today. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate what you're doing there in Mitchell and in your faith communities there. And we just ask that, as you go forth, Megan, that you're doing good work, and we just pray that God will continue to work through you. So thanks a lot. Appreciate it, Megan.
Thank you.
I'll turn off the recording, and then
Okay, that work?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh.